The Locked On Podcast Network presents the NFL Big 3 in 30. The 3 biggest stories in the NFL from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The NFL Big 3 in 30 starts now with the biggest story in the NFL.
The Dallas Cowboys introduced Brian Schottenheimer as their next head coach.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast.
There's a lot of nonsense that we'll get to in a little bit, but let's start with just Schottenheimer talking. What were some of your big takeaways coming out of that press conference?
I mean, I think you got to see a good look at exactly, who Brian Schottenheimer is and what kind of leader he is and how he commands the room. I think this is a guy that, there's a reason that we had been speaking in the way we have about the guy the last, few days. And, we have talked a lot about the process of him being hired. We'll talk about it a little bit more. But when we talked about Brian Schottenheimer, we talked about the fact that we felt like he's qualified to do this job. He's qualified. We can talk about whether he's the best candidate or whether he's the kind of candidate the Cowboys need right now. But as far as being an NFL head coach, he commands the room. He understands what he wants to do. He has a vision for the team. He's confident. He has a lot of familiarity with the players in this locker room, as shown by the fact that a bunch of them showed up to this press conference today. So I think, as far as first impressions of a head coach go, I really like that he, took a block of time up front to thank a bunch of people. I think that served as a really great kind of introduction to who he was for folks that maybe haven't seen him in interviews or just over the years. So I think you saw an example of a guy who's a football lifer who has been in the league for a long, long time, despite only being 50 years old. I think, we predicted that Cowboys fans would see a lot of why the Cowboys wanted to hire Brian Schottenheimer when he did this press conference, because this is kind of one of the more impressive parts of Brian Schottenheimer. And I do think that we saw a guy that, looks the part for sure. And now the question becomes, like, how does he build his roster? How does the team look? How does the team respond to him? I'm going to find out next.
I thought he impressed. And again, that's where we thought he would. He is a very good public speaker. He does a really good job of connecting with players. I wish we could have heard more from Schottenheimer on what his scheme was going to be. We did get to some of that, and I want to touch on that, but I wanted to hear about
Patrick Walker, by the way.
Yeah. I wanted to hear some thoughts on how does he view analytics? What does he think of going forward on fourth down and certain game situations rather than some of the other nonsense we heard? But some of the key words that he said that I liked was talked about more shifts and more motions, and how he thinks the current batch of players that he has right now does really well when they play with tempo, and that they don't have to go out there and think so much. So he said a lot of things if you were worried about what this offense was going to look like, I think those should encourage you. So I thought that part of the press conference was really insightful.
Yeah, frankly, the way he responded to Patrick Walker's question is honestly, we could do a whole podcast on that whole section of just the talk about the use of splits and motions to muddy up the look for the defense. And I think, that is those are important keywords for Cowboys fans that are trying to figure out what this offense is going to look like, because that is something that has been missing from this offense. Yeah. So I think that that was really, really reassuring to hear those words. And then I think we should have a whole conversation about the tempo aspect of it, because I think, first of all, tempo was one of the few things that this offense did well almost the entire season. When they played with tempo, they moved the ball pretty consistently. And there were definitely different points during the season in which you and I even called for them to use tempo more regularly, because it was seemingly very successful when they were getting in and out of plays and not having to overthink things. It felt like they moved the ball really well. So I think reading between the lines there a little bit, and I kind of want to go back and rewatch that part of the press conference one more time. It felt like that was maybe a point of contention between McCarthy and the players and or Schottenheimer is the lack of use of tempo, or the fact that the team wanted to use tempo. So that really kind of caught my eye or my ear rather, when they said that, and just the way that was all being phrased and the way that Schotty kind of harped on tempo there. I think that's kind of where I'm looking for right now, is where are the lines of delineation between the previous era of Cowboys and Schottenheimer? Where are there going to be changes? I think that's those areas that we just mentioned: motion, splits, tempo. These are all things that you're seeing more and more of or being leveraged more and more in modern offenses. And the hope is that the Cowboys are going to start trying to modernize this offense a little bit by adding those elements into it.
Yeah, in terms of tempo, I think like Mike McCarthy this year had to do a little bit of a balancing act, not trying to use too much tempo because his defense was just shattered with injuries, right? But I do think like in 2023, when they were healthy on defense and they had a defense that was creating a bunch of turnovers, maybe that's when they could have used some more tempo. So from that standpoint, again, I'm very encouraged by what I heard from him. One of the other takeaways I saw or heard him talk about was getting under center and using more play action and becoming a better play action team. I think he talked about how they need Dak to be more fit. They want Dak to be under center more so they can use the play action game, and that should help the running game as well. Again, everything he said about the X's and O's stuff, I was impressed by.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what we were hoping to hear from him, right? So we'll see, again, how that actually translates once we get into training camp, once we get into the regular season, obviously. But right now, at least the vision is correct and where we want to go. I like the direction that they're headed, and I hope that they kind of continue to follow through on that, because I do think that if that's what we're signing up for is just a kind of refresh, updated version of this offense with just more modern principles kind of, sprinkled in so that you can gain that extra edge. I think that that's something I can buy into offensively, and it certainly goes a long way in making me feel better about the play calling aspect of this whole situation.
The last thing I want to say on Schottenheimer before we move on is I do think it's important to grit your teeth and watch this press conference, because I'm seeing some quotes on Twitter like, I don't love the new head coach saying that X's and O's don't matter. Well, if you watched it, that's not what Brian Schottenheimer was saying. He was saying that the players matter and the relationship matters. And he thinks of it more as players rather than plays, right? Like, how do we get CeeDee Lamb? And again, I'm paraphrasing this, but like, how does he get CeeDee Lamb the ball on a 3rd and 7, right? How do I make sure that my best players are getting touches? We see an Eagles team that I don't think is overly great in terms of their scheme. They scored 55 points yesterday because they have some outstanding talent, and the offensive coordinator knows how to use those talents. I think what Brian Schottenheimer was trying to say there, like, hey, we're going to adjust our X's and O's based on our talent, rather than saying, hey, here's our scheme and you better fit into it.
Yeah, I tend to think that, in general, I understand why Cowboys fandom is upset with the Joneses. Absolutely every right to be. But don't let that anger at the Joneses leak over to Brian Schottenheimer, who only wanted to have a head coaching job in the NFL, and one of the better ones at that. So let's give Schotty a chance here to kind of prove himself or not prove himself, and try to separate that whole situation from maybe poor process by the Joneses of hiring him in the first place.
I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. I used to go to comedy shows all the time. Me and my friends in college used to go all the time. It's a blast. You don't even need, alcohol. You just go and have fun and laugh. It's a comedy show. That's the whole point. Just go have fun. Gametime has a new called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Takeaways from the first day of a new era of Jets football.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast.
Well, the Jets introduced their new head coach and new general manager today. It was the introductory press conference for Aaron Glenn and Darren Muji. And I think it's fair to say they both came off very well. It's the easiest thing in the world to do, or it should be the easiest thing in the world to do, to win the introductory press conference. This is the least important thing that either Glenn or Muji will do during their respective Jets tenures. This is a day full of pomp and circumstance, a day with a lot of pageantry. It's very symbolic. It's the team turning the page, looking to a future that they hope will be brighter. And you hear a lot of big picture stuff. I think if you take the introductory press conferences of most head coaches and most general managers, a lot of what they say is very boilerplate. You hear the same stuff about building the team the right way. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how well you do in your introductory press conference. Adam Gase did a terrible job in his introductory press conference, and he was a bad coach for the Jets. Dan Campbell did a terrible job at his introductory press conference with the Lions 4 years ago, ended up being a great coach. Robert Saleh did a very good job 4 years ago at his introductory press conference with the Jets, and he was a bad coach. Rex Ryan was the ultimate winner of his press conference and did a good job. So there's no real rhyme or reason to, there's no connection between how well you do in your press conference and how good of a coach you are. It's really just about giving first impressions. And sometimes you hear a comment or two that gives you real insight into the way somebody thinks. Well, this press conference began with Woody Johnson speaking, and I'll say this: Woody Johnson did make a reference to the fact I need to be a better owner, and Woody offering any sort of self-reflection, no matter how cursory it is, no matter how short it is, no matter how believable it is. I'm going to call that a win. And then Woody Johnson, he spoke for a few minutes. There's something that was really weird to me is he started talking about the importance between the relationship between the head coach and the GM, and how the head coach lays out the vision and the GM needs to understand the type of players you want to get. It sounded almost exactly like what I was saying in the segment last week. Maybe my mind's playing tricks on me. It wasn't just boilerplate stuff. It was he was saying the exact same things I said last week when I talked about the importance of the relationship between the coach and the GM. So it's weird to it's weird for me to agree with Woody Johnson. In fact, go back and listen to that segment and then listen to what Woody said. Am I making this up? I doubt Woody was listening and then said, well, I'm just going to say exactly that. But man, that was a weird moment for me. Although it's part of the reason it was weird. It was what Woody Johnson was saying was actually making sense. But then Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn spoke. And as I mentioned last week, I think their partnership, not just how good they are at their jobs, but how well they work together is critical. Because you see it on the field. You see it with players. You can have the most talented roster in the league, but if the players don't work well together, if the pieces don't fit, your team's not going to win. I think the same is true of the head coach and general manager relationship. They need to be on the same page. They need to understand what each of them needs from each other. The GM needs to understand the types of players the coach wants. The coach needs to develop the players the GM gets. It's a very important relationship. You can have a guy who's a great talent evaluator. You can have a guy who's a great head coach. But if they don't work well together, the team's not going to have big success. And look, you can't come away definitively thinking two guys are going to work well together based on a couple of anecdotes from a press conference. But Muji talked about when he was with Denver, and when the Broncos had a coaching opening a few years ago, they interviewed Glenn. And they talked about how Glenn blew them away. Glenn was just so passionate that he commanded the room. And then he mentioned one thing that I'm probably the only one who noticed this. He talked about how when he interviewed for the Jets GM job, he was in Glenn's office. And that was music to my ears, because that showed me that Aaron Glenn actually had some input into this hire, that this was not when the Jets hired, Todd Bowles and Mike McCagnon, and they just kind of ran these two parallel searches with these guys who weren't really interested in working with each other. The fact that Glenn was part of this, I think, was a positive. And it shows that, they'll be able to, at least there's some commonalities there. And, what Muji said about Glenn commanding the room, 9 times out of 10, I would say, well, if Glenn was so great, why didn't you hire him? It's very easy to pay lip service to somebody. But in that search, the Broncos hired Sean Payton, the Super Bowl winning coach. So when you hire a coach of that pedigree and you pass on Glenn for that, I actually do believe what Muji said about Aaron Glenn. And it's going to be critical that these guys work well together. Now, the Jets announced a change to their reporting structure. Both Muji and Glenn will report directly to Woody Johnson. And that's a change because nominally, at least, Robert Saleh reported to Joe Douglas, and then Joe Douglas reported to Woody Johnson. Of course, over this last year, Woody Johnson kind of bulldozed that arrangement, and Woody took total control of the franchise. And if you've been listening to the show, I'm not really wild about the idea of both the head coach and the GM reporting to Woody, because, my concern with this franchise has always been divide and conquer with the owner. But I think last year kind of shows you how sometimes the nominal structure isn't that important, because in theory, Joe Douglas was supposed to be in charge of the team last year, and Woody Johnson still took control and, dominated everybody. So it's less important to me that, both of these guys report directly to Woody Johnson. It's more important that they're just on the same page, because where the Jets fall into trouble is like when the head coach and the GM disagree, and then Woody becomes like the tie-breaking vote. That's become an enormous area of pitfalls for the Jets through the years, in addition to other areas where the owner is too hands-on. But if there's alignment, if these guys work well together, if, again, Glenn lays out his vision, Glenn sets the overall culture. And, if you saw that press conference, again, there's only so much you can take from the press conference, but Aaron Glenn has a chance to be a culture-changing coach. I'm not going to say he's going to be based on a few comments in the press conference, but you can see how he gets people fired up. You can see the presence he has, the way he commands the room. If he sets that culture, and he communicates well with Muji, and Muji's good at identifying the types of players who are fits for the Jets. And when I say fits for the Jets, I mean, do they have the attributes needed to run Aaron Glenn systems? But I also mean, are these guys who are going to be the type of players you bring in to build a strong locker room culture? Are these going to be the types of guys who work hard? Are these going to be the types of guys who don't make excuses? That's what's important. It's not so much the nominal structure of the organization, because last year the Jets had a different nominal structure. The Jets actually, in theory, had a structure where the GM was in charge, but in reality, he wasn't. And things didn't work very well. So I heard what I wanted to hear. It's one thing to say you're going to work well together. It's one thing to say you're going to work well together before there's been the potential for any conflict, before there's been the potential for any problems. When the rubber actually hits the road, when you hit a rough patch, that's when we'll find out how well these guys work together. But what I was really listening for was, first of all, the fact that the idea that there was a rapport between these two guys. And two, the idea that Glenn was involved in the hiring of the GM. That the Jets were thinking about this, that the Jets were going to make sure that the GM and the head coach were on the same page, that at least on paper, these guys can work well together. So for me, that was a really positive development. I might be the only one who picked up on that, but I think that was actually a really critical thing to listen for. And I heard what I wanted to hear.
Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing that you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that's icing on the cake. The one bet you could look at, $5 on the NBA tonight. The Lakers head east to play the Sixers. FanDuel likes LeBron and company and has LA favored by 4 in Philly. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus. FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59.
Art Rooney, the Steelers owner, finally spoke to media yesterday.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
All in all, not a huge wave day for Art Rooney. Granted, that's never really been his style, nor has it been the Steelers' style. But a few things that I thought were interesting to be acknowledged by Art Rooney. One, saying he understands why people are mad. He says all I can say is actions speak louder than words, and we've got to be better. And I hear that, but Alan, I think when people hear that, they're like, okay, so what are the actions? And he says, hey, we're sticking with Mike Tomlin. He's like, hey, don't expect wholesale changes in the coaching staff, but does acknowledge there will be some changes. What is your sense as far as like what are these actions that he plans to when he plans to be at the head of as the owner of the Steelers?
Well, I'm going to do this before I answer the question. And I'm just taking over, even though it's your podcast. But you have a little video game deal over your left shoulder there. I don't know what it is. It's always there.
Oh yeah, it's my Marvel versus Capcom mini console.
Airbnb has Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh,
Big
snap.
Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh, snap.
So I just want to show off because right?
That's pretty cool.
Like
That's
that.
pretty cool.
Chris, Art Rooney said actions speak louder than words, and then said, "There's nothing I can do right now." Basically, I mean, that's pretty much what he said. That the theory of what he said is the big problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers has been the inability to find a difference maker at the quarterback position, and there is not much hope for a change in that right now. And so I think if you believe that, then all you're doing is making change for the sake of making change. And I'm not saying that there isn't some value in that. Probably is. But I also can understand a lack of willingness to do that. So if Art Rooney really believes that the biggest problem with the Steelers is their inability to find a solution at the quarterback position, that they tried once on Kenny Pickett, didn't work out, and Art said there's nothing to be learned from that mistake, which I will disagree with, but I'll respect his answer. If he believes all that, well, then there isn't much he can do right now because there is no answer coming through that door quarterback better than Justin Fields or Russell Wilson in 2025. And there isn't a whole lot of reason to think that either of those guys are going to get the Steelers to where they want to be either.
And see, that's the thing here is that, like you said, it feels kind of stuck, right? Like you're talking, if he's talking about, hey, actions speak louder than words, he understands, but then he goes into like all the reasons why, like, listen, it's not going to change a lot right now. And to a degree here, you also understand it's not like he's speaking out one side of two sides of his face there. He's right. Like the Steelers, if they made wholesale, if they blew it up right now, fire the coaching staff, trade away TJ Watt, you're not okay. You do all that, you're still not getting the quarterback of your future right now, and then you become much worse. And then you can say, okay, maybe you can find him down the line, but then you throw away every chance to inherit for that quarterback that you eventually do go get down the line, to inherit something that can be of a winning culture that can say, hey, you're inheriting a slightly above average team that can get to the playoffs. If you make them decidedly better, they become better than that, and then they are a more dangerous team. That's kind of what happened with Ben Roethlisberger when they got him. And granted, they were 6-10 the year that they got him, the year before they got him. So like it was a little different. But he inherited he inherited a team with a really good run game. He with a tough defense, with playmakers on offense, and it was a plug in the situation. And it was such a big lift from Tommy Maddox to him that they were 15-1 his first season, and they were immediately contenders in those years under Bill Cowher. And so that made for a thing there. I think the point that he's looking at here is like, look, like we know what the situation is. This is a quarterback-driven league, and we don't got the quarterback that drives. Now, we like the two guys that we got for now, and Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, and we'll get to that whole situation, how they talked about that, as well as his comments on Kenny Pickett. But all in all, I think his point is like, look, we know that we got to be better, but we also have to stay the course right now if you're the Steelers. And that's where I do agree in the sense that blowing up your attempt to become more like the way that the Eagles are building right now when you brought in Andy Weidel to help Omar Khan, that's not going to help you get to being like that team right now. And I think that is the ultimate point here is that, look, like I know Steelers fans are impatient because they haven't seen a playoff win since the 2016 season. But at the same time, you're not going to get one any faster by just hitting the reset button over and over and over again. And he also kind of made that point is that like the league averages anywhere from 6 to 8 new coaches a year. And that doesn't always lead to great results.
Yeah, I mean, look at the number of coaches that have been hired since, let's just say, since COVID, so 4 years. Like, how many of those guys worked out to be way better than Mike Tomlin? Like, is there one or two? Like, maybe, yeah, but like your chances are low. So, like, you're committing to probably doing that. Like, everyone likes to point out that the Eagles moved on from Andy Reid and then got back to the Super Bowl with Nick Sirianni. They don't like to point out that the first coach was a failure and they got worse in the interim. Like, so I think you have to look at the Steelers and say, okay, this is still a playoff team. They were 10-3 at one point. They probably underachieved on defense, given their talent level. is this a team that it makes sense to blow up, or is this a team where it makes more sense to do what you're talking about and just try to continue to incrementally get better until you are able to make that big splash at the quarterback position? You said they had to go. They went 6-10 when they drafted Ben Roethlisberger, but they picked him at 11. The Steelers have already traded up to 10.
Yeah.
Not that long ago to go get Devin Bush. It's not that hard. It wasn't that painful to go make that trade. Like, you can go get your guy if he's there to be had. I think right now the problem is it's not there.
Yeah, this just isn't a quarterback draft year. This isn't the year to go get, Arch Manning or, whoever the big guy that you want next year. And maybe that is the thing. Maybe it's next year you want to be there. But as I've brought up before in the show, the Chiefs, when they went and got Patrick Mahomes, they were the second seed in the AFC. They traded up. They were 12-4 that season when they traded up to the 10th overall pick to get Patrick Mahomes. And granted, that don't always work, but you can do it, especially when you build an offensive line, playmakers into your offense, a defensive core, which that's what they're trying to get right now. They have a defensive core. They're trying to make sure that they have a good offensive line. They're trying to get better playmakers. I think that's the mission this year, is to set those things up and then have most of those heading in the right direction, and even to the point where they're proficient, so that when the quarterback comes in that you draft, and whether you want them to sit behind a year 3 Justin Fields or a year 3 Russell Wilson or whatever, you at least have something that they can inherit, that they're not coming in and having to make things up on the fly. Because whereas it really worked out for Jaden Daniels, that don't always work as we see in the NFL with young quarterbacks. Look at Caleb Williams and what he's dealing with, and what Ben Johnson's going to have to quickly turn around. And to your point about Andy Reid, and I brought this up on the Final Word Sunday night. People love to bring that analogy up, but they always leave out the part where Andy Reid left the Eagles, created maybe the greatest dynasty in football, because if they win a Super Bowl this year, they'll have won 4 in 6 years, which ties the Steelers in the 70s, which nobody had ever done. And by the way, if they win this Super Bowl, they will have beaten the Eagles, the team that let Andy Reid go. Could you imagine if Mike Tomlin was fired by the Steelers, created a 4 Super Bowl run for the Cowboys, and in the process beat the Steelers twice? This town would be livid with itself about that. So I'm not saying that, hey, if you fire Mike Tomlin, he's just going to win 4 Super Bowls somewhere else. But stop using the Andy Reid analogy. It's stupid.
I guarantee, like, if Andy Reid beats the Eagles in the Super Bowl again, and nobody in Philly can be walking around with their chest puffed out about how they successfully moved on from Andy Reid. None. Zero.
Yeah, it's there. And look, if they win this time, great. You finally got one over him. He still created a 3-time Super Bowl champion dynasty, and Patrick Mahomes is still 29 years old.
Would you rather have Andy Reid or Nick Sirianni as your head coach right now?